So welcome to the third of our virtual Alumni 7 speakers in our spring series. Our 7 talks will continue on Wednesdays, and we'll be sending out reminders every Wednesday morning, so you guys can be sure to join. We'd like to thank George Hodgin, class of 2009, for his willingness to be here with us and give his 7 talk today. George was scheduled to lead a discussion session at the West Coast Alumni Symposium that I think may have been one of the very first events, large events canceled at the very beginning of the COVID-19 outbreak. And when we rescheduled it to October, George was not able to make that date. He was certain of that. So we asked him if he would be willing to pivot and be one of our spring 7 speakers instead. And as somebody who's going to talk about pivots and championing the journey, which is something we really love and believe in, and we love championing the journey, and we love taking a detour every now and then off the sort of linear path to embrace kind of a more winding way. And so we're thrilled to have George talk with us today about non-traditional paths in life. Thank you, George, for being with us and for sharing your story.
My pleasure, and thanks to everyone for tuning in. I'll dive right in. I don't remember the first time I knew I wanted to be a Navy SEAL, but I do remember the first time I really felt like one. And it was at about 2 in the morning, about 60 miles from the border of Pakistan in early spring, and the smell of warming fires were everywhere. I really distinctly remember the crunch and quiet crunch of gravel under my boots and watching the shapes of my men approach a meeting of Taliban leaders. I was really proud that at the young age of 25, I was leading SEALs into combat like I'd wanted to do ever since I could remember. I knew every single thing about them. I knew the way they walked, the way they wore their gear. I loved all of them. And through the green tent of my night vision, a silhouette standing on a roof about 100 yards away turned, raised an AK-47, and sprayed machine gun fire at my team of 16 SEALs and our dog. For the next 4 hours, my teammates and I fought our way through a village and valley of Taliban bomb makers, planners, and even an alleged suicide bomber that was sent from Pakistan to target our team in a nearby market. The mission was an overwhelming success. And for me personally, despite the utter exhaustion, I had never been more fulfilled or more happy in my life. It was the first combat mission I had led, and our team returned to base without injury and having accomplished our mission spectacularly. When I reflect on a non-traditional career path and what I found myself in and what we're talking about today, I find that the moments when I'm at my best, both personally and professionally, and when I'm happiest, are when I feel a profound sense of purpose. Every day I went to work as a SEAL, I felt inspired because of my impact, and I never had a question about my purpose and potential impact on different teammates. Assuming all your basic needs are met, healthcare, livable salary, roof over your heads, etc., I can't imagine a deeper sense of gratitude or joy than personal fulfillment. My wife, Caroline, whom I met at Chapel Hill, and I have a 1-year-old son, Mattis, and another on the way, which fortunately we're really excited about. Unfortunately, coincides with the October rescheduling of the forum, his soon-to-be birth. But my job in my life now is much different than it was as a SEAL. I founded a company after Stanford Business School dedicated to researching the good and bad effects of cannabis in hopes that it will lead to breakthrough treatments for suffering patients and alternative healthcare solutions that I think our country really needs. And I know, much to Chuck and Megan's chagrin, I'm not able to do this in person at the foundation and give out any samples. So you'll have to imagine virtually. But our goal is to be the first federally legal producer of marijuana in the United States, which requires navigating a really complex regulatory scheme through the DEA and the FDA. We don't break any federal laws, and so it's a really challenging business environment for us. And while there are times that I wish that the Taliban was shooting at me instead of trying to overcome federal government apathy and inertia that I think we're all feeling, irrespective of whatever side of the aisle you sit on, the challenges and the fulfillment that my job bring me now make the challenges look really small and feel really small, because I'm able to focus on our purpose and our mission. Stanford Business School, their admissions essay is notoriously what matters most to you and why. And I think that's a great forcing function that we all, particularly right now in our lives, could ask ourselves. Why personally are we here? And that's not to say that the emotional roller coaster of being an entrepreneur or following a non-traditional, non-linear path is without sadness, frustration, or doubt. Having started my own small and hopefully one day big business, I have more respect for family business owners, small business owners, and other entrepreneurs that I ever knew was possible. My wife, Caroline, would absolutely attest. There have been days and nights as a SEAL and as an entrepreneur where I've completely crumbled under anxiety and fear that my business wouldn't work. But those moments of being down don't define me. What defines me and what defines you and our moments of doubt or grief or pain that are certain to come with any non-traditional career path, it's the response to those moments. And lucky for all of us, we get to choose that response. The SEAL ethos says, I'll never quit. If I'm knocked down, I'll get back up every time. And Epictetus, a Greek philosopher I like, says it's not what happens to you, but it's how you react that matters. I think that's a really important lesson for anyone contemplating a non-traditional career path. The only lesson I will give you, if you're considering charting a non-traditional career path, and I think graduating seniors, you're all going to have non-traditional career paths at this point. Find yourself a partner or support network that's going to catch you and lift you up when you fall. Be it a spouse, a friend, a parent, a sibling, a dog, anybody that you can come to lean on. And make no mistake, I'm not in any way glorifying or putting more value on people that follow a passion or entrepreneurs. I think anybody in the world who works to make ends meet or works a job, even that they don't enjoy as much as they would like, I think that's incredibly noble and should be celebrated. So I just want to make sure I'm not putting like entrepreneurship and non-traditional career paths on some pedestal. But I do hope that, and particularly seniors, as you go to graduate, if you do find yourself working in a job that maybe doesn't make you as happy as you would like, make sure you're doing it intentionally for the betterment of a situation or your own career path. And just whatever you do, don't do anything out of an obligation to run the rat race because you think it's what other people want you to do. For me, the lack of a traditional corporate safety net or guaranteed paycheck has definitely been emotionally challenging. But as the coronavirus has shown all of us, there's no such thing as a guaranteed job or a life without a challenge anymore. So the way I think about my life is, why not do what makes me happy, brings me joy, and gives me purpose? And I'm young enough and willing enough to take a bet on myself. And seniors, you should be feeling that way too, because if you're here, you're obviously an incredible person. If it doesn't work, I'll at least know that I tried. And I think the real risk for me is the regret of not having chased a dream when I had the chance. My favorite professor at Stanford Business School, who was a really successful entrepreneur, leadership visionary, ended what was my favorite class in grad school simply by writing on the whiteboard, regret for what you have done can be tempered by time, but regret for what you have not done is inconsolable. Thanks so much to everybody for tuning in. I know there's 1,000 ways you could all be spending your time right now. It means a lot to me that you've chosen to spend a little time with me. So thank you very much, and I'll stop and answer any questions I can.
So one of the biggest problem with all the drugs, I'm Mac Harrell from Florida. One of the biggest problems we have with drug delivery, I'm a retired physician songwriter. The biggest problems we have with delivery is that many times traditional forms of delivery are associated with morbidities, and that's particularly the case with smokable drugs. I'm wondering what sort of directions you're taking in your company to find ways to deliver cannabinoids without inhaling combustion products.
Yep. Thanks. Was it Mac? Is that right?
Yeah, Mac is in trucks.
Thanks, Mac. I appreciate the question. So our business's goal is to produce API, active pharmaceutical ingredient, in oil or crystalline, like isolate form, so that finished good manufacturers can take our active ingredient and create the drug that they want. I don't think so far, and I don't think that this will ever change in our lifetime, the FDA shows no indication that they would ever approve a combustible. It's just too dangerous. And as you said, it's really challenging to dose. We have seen that the FDA has approved an oral solution called Epidiolex, which treats children's epilepsy. And that uses cannabinoids it's actually suspended in an oil-based drug. And so what we're trying to do is do the same thing, suspend cannabinoids in MCT oil, sunflower oil, as well as to produce a crystalline that could then be put in some sort of absorbable or ingestible. So I have no desire to try and create a pharmaceutical product out of a smokable. It's just too hard. But nonetheless, the problem our business is trying to solve, and this is, I think, kind of going back to the non-traditional career path, is 200 million Americans today and live in a state where they can access cannabis legally, but physicians, doctors, and drug developers can't, because none of those people that produce cannabis have gone through the FDA and the DEA process to be able to sell it to an institution like a doctor or a hospital that has to abide by the Controlled Substances Act. So we're pioneering that pathway. So our goal is to go through the federal compliance process, and we're doing it now to be able to do that. So I don't want to completely dismiss combustibles, because even today, there's no way to do it's very challenging to do a study of secondhand smoke of cannabis or marijuana, because a doctor can't get his or her hands on smokable marijuana to do it, because that producer hasn't been approved by the DEA. So while I don't want to create pharmaceutical drugs out of smokables or combustibles, the need is still there in the research community for them to get their hands on it so that they can see sort of what these 200 million American consumers are actually doing to themselves.
George, we have another question for you from Tom Morris. He wondered who the professor is at Stanford that you were referring to, and what else did you love about his class?
It's a really cool question. His name is Irv Grousbeck. He now is he's the owner, he and his son are the owner of the Boston Celtics. And he started after business school back in the 60s or 70s, started a telecom company. And so he's sort of led and been an entrepreneur. What I loved most about his class, and it seems really germane to what we're doing now, is that he teaches a class at the med school between business school students and med school students. And the entire purpose of the class is delivering bad or unpopular news. And he says, look, you can teach people you can teach a med school student biology and textbooks all the time, but people don't remember what you tell them. They remember how you made them feel. And as a business leader and as a doctor, bedside manner and then the ability to deliver challenging news as an entrepreneur is really important. And so what he does more or less is just takes med school students, marries them with a business school student, and puts them in cases where they're delivering really challenging medical news to role players. So he'll bring in people and say, you'll read a case and you'll have, and I actually do this is a real one, where they bring in a patient who's suffering from multiple sclerosis. Like, that's not a role player. This person has MS and they're in a wheelchair, and you have to go through as the young doctor or young business leader delivering the news that you've just diagnosed them. And it's incredibly emotional and challenging, but it drives home the point of the way to deliver challenging news, which is so important. I presume medicine and certainly in business.
That's great.
Thank you. Raleigh had a question for you from London. Raleigh.
Hi, I'm Raleigh. I'm from England. I'm a rising sophomore. I just had a question about your time at UNC a bit more. So I just wanted to find out, like, while at UNC during your undergraduate career, did you imagine your path being like more linear? And if so, like, what changed between now and then that made you think that you wanted to branch out into something else? Because obviously you've had two very different career paths. So what changed? And yeah, I'll leave it at that. I have another question, but I'll wait for you to answer that.
Oh, well, thanks so much for tuning in. I know it's late where you are in London. It's interesting. I think, like, I'm young now. I mean, I'm like in my mid 30s. And when I look at anybody that's older than me, when I look at their career paths, or certainly when I think back to when I was at UNC, everything just in hindsight and in retrospect seems so linear, but I don't think it really ever is. And so I would, if I were in your shoes, I would not obsess about trying to create some sort of linear career path. For me, I knew I wanted to be a SEAL, and I saw Chuck had asked a question. I knew I wanted to be a SEAL, and the reason that led me down this non-traditional path was while I was at business school, a close friend of mine, another special operations veteran, had fallen victim to the opioid crisis and was being treated with a lot of opiates, and he had PTSD. And he asked, and I got involved in his healthcare, and he asked his doctor, hey, could you tell me where I could get medical marijuana or how much I need to use? I'm sick of the way the traditional drugs are making me feel, and I can't focus when I'm in class. And this doctor said, look, I would tell you, but kind of to Mac's point earlier, like there's just no real way for a physician to advise someone on how to dose a smokable product. It's really challenging from a medical provider's perspective. And so I'm sitting there watching this thinking like, this is absolutely crazy. What do you mean there's nobody researching marijuana? And so I got really obsessed with it and decided to start my business around it. So it seemed that in and of itself seems like non-traditional and non-linear, but the underlying theme, I think, or what does seem linear is that I've been lucky enough to find things that motivate me and give me a sense of purpose. And so I would say like the motivation for my job has been, and my life has been linear and pretty consistent throughout. It's just manifested itself in different career paths and career fields. But the short answer, like if I was at Chapel Hill and ever thought to myself, hey, in 10 or 15 years, 10 years, I'm going to be like trying to work through the FDA to grow marijuana to sell to pharmaceutical companies, like absolutely not. I never would have imagined this. So like just as sophomores, seniors, people are thinking about it, like have an idea of what you want to do, but be opportunistic about different things that pop up in your life. Like you're all smart people, your lives are going to work out. Don't be obsessed with a linear career path.
And Sonny has a question for you, George.
Hey, George, this is Sonny. I live in San Francisco. I saw you live in Carmel, pretty close by. But first of all, thank you for sharing your story. I love it when you kind of can put us in this situation. I would love if you could do the same for us and kind of talk through, if you can put yourself back in your shoes right after you left the Navy, left being a Navy SEAL. How were you evaluating, which direction you're going to go in? And I would love for you to kind of talk through the influences of being a Navy SEAL. I'm sure that kind of provides you a structure on how to evaluate where your next path is. I'll kind of love for you to talk through what that felt like and, put us in your shoes at that time.
Yeah, it felt really intimidating and really challenging. I think what I miss most about being a SEAL, and I kind of touched on it, was like the daily sense of fulfillment and purpose, and having a really, really close-knit group of friends and teammates that the camaraderie is just incredible. And so before I had the idea to start my current business, which is like the second year of business school, so there was about a year and a half there where I definitely felt really frustrated and overwhelmed. I didn't like know it at the time, but looking back, it's evident to me. And it was because I just didn't have a sense of purpose or fulfillment. I mean, I was like really, really fortunate and lucky to be at business school in such a great place, but I just felt like I was kind of going through the motions and I didn't really know what I was doing it for. And I think that's part of the process. That's part of the journey of like struggling and trying different things out that allowed me to find what it was that made me happy. But during that period of leaving the SEAL teams, it was really overwhelming. And then I alluded to this too, like the one unforgivable sin of being a SEAL is quitting on something. And so although I wasn't like quitting being a SEAL, I did it for 7 years. Felt really strange to me to leave and move on to a different period of my life. Cause like the machine continues, right? The guys I served with are still serving. They're all overseas right now. And so I did feel this really strange thing where I felt like I was quitting and turning my back on them, even though I'd like served my time and done relatively well. So it was definitely a rough patch, but now I've never been sort of more excited or more happy as I am now. I think primarily just because I have something I'm focused on.
So Nina had a question for you. Oh, Sonny, you have a follow-up. Go ahead. Good.
Oh, no, I was just thanking George for sharing that. No, go ahead.
Great. Now, I just, you kind of got at this a little bit, but Nina's question is more focused on how you would say that your time as a SEAL helped shape what you're doing now and in what ways.
I think the no quit attitude and the has absolutely helped. I mean, we've been at this dealing with trying to be the first people to do this for a little bit over 3 years now. And so I think if this business doesn't work, then like people will look back, or I'll look back and say, wow, I should have quit, after a year. Why did I keep banging my head against a wall? But if it works, and then I'll look back and say, like, that perseverance that I learned as a SEAL is what enabled its success. So I think the perseverance, the no quit attitude is absolutely has helped me in dealing with the government and with a really, really complex regulatory regime. I think also, like, as a SEAL or as a military officer, certainly as a SEAL officer, your job is leadership and management, not some really specific level of expertise. And so what I mean by that is, like, I talked about one of the missions I went on. I was 25 and I was leading people on my team that were snipers, medics, explosive specialists, but I wasn't a specialist. I was I was like the conductor of the orchestra, and they were the instrument players. And so when I think about my job now, it's very similar. And so I was prepared to do that, to kind of be like a jack of all trades, master of none, really. Is like, you just have to learn how to conduct the orchestra, and being a young SEAL officer really prepares you that through, like, trial by fire, honestly.
Dak Cannon is wondering how COVID has impacted your business over the past 2 months, and wants to know about your outlook and capital planning for quarters 3 and 4 and beyond.
It's negatively impacted us in the sense that a lot of regulatory inspections have to happen on site. So it's delayed a lot of our development from, like, FDA and DEA, the two regulatory agencies that oversee us. FDA overseeing medicine and drug devices, DEA overseeing controlled substances or narcotics. So they've been, like all of us, not as efficient or as quick as possible because they're having to work from home. Similarly, our really large, our customer base, a lot of it is academic or translational drug development researchers. So, like, for example, a clinic at UNC Chapel Hill that we could sell products to. None of those researchers are on campus anymore. So it's really challenging for us. So our customer orders have really, really dropped off. For capital planning, it's also been a challenge. So we're in the middle of a fundraise now, not necessarily because we completely need it, but I just want to have a really, really healthy balance sheet and more cash than I think we need going into the period of uncertainty over the next year, almost like it's recession insurance. My outlook is, I mean, I have to be an optimist. So just because that's my nature and kind of my job at the company, I think partially. So my outlook is that the short term is going to continue to be really bumpy and unknown and scary. But over the long term, this is probably, like, on the business community anyways, COVID is, for pharmaceutical manufacturing like me, could be advantageous, because I think we're going to see the federal government do everything in their power to onshore a lot of the pharmaceutical and drug supply chain. I think that the thought of having drug suppliers and drug manufacturers continue to manufacture a lot of critical infrastructure products or drug ingredients in places like India and China makes the federal government nervous. So I think that we're going to see a lot of incentives to bring some manufacturing back into the States, which would benefit us, frankly, or my company. So I don't know, Dak, if that answered your question, but that was a good one.
We've got another question. This one's from Ruben. one of his favorite quotes is, "You don't rise to the occasion, you fall to your training." Are there any values or habits that you fall back on in tough times like Taliban attacks or business dry spells?
Yes, I think that I had a misconception going into the SEAL teams that SEALs do really really intricate or nuanced things really well, and I think that that's a misconception. SEAls they just do the basics better than anybody else. Like we train to do the basics better than anyone else, similar to sports or something like that. And so that has been a lesson that's been instilled in me forever. And I think it definitely plays a part when it comes to business, which is like everything has to be healthy under the hood, that growth and good economies can cover up a lot of mistakes. And like, Warren Buffett says, when the tide goes out, you can kind of see who hasn't been doing a good job. And so hopefully we've set our business up for success by doing the basics really, really well, even when the times were good. And I think the other lesson that I always go back to is there's a saying in BUDS, which is SEAL training, that it's like, how do you eat an elephant? And the answer is one bite at a time. And so when I think about really overwhelming business challenges, or, oh my God, what's going to happen because of coronavirus, or what's the world going to look like in a year? From a psychological perspective, it's important to just control what you can control and take things day by day, because I think COVID is going to be like eating an elephant. We've got to just do it one bite at a time.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. Also, I'm glad you brought up that quote. What's funny, one of my friends has a different take. He says, when the tide goes out, you can tell who's wearing pants and who's not.
Exactly.
That's awesome, Ruben. Thanks. Sandy Shaw, class of '66, has chimed in and wondered what your planning horizon is.
My Sandy, do you mean in what sense? Like from a business perspective or personal perspective?
He's given us a thumbs up. Business mostly, Sandy? Business? Yeah, business perspective.
For me, I try and think, and we're like a young new company, so I can kind of have pipe dreams about what the next 2 or 3 years will look like, and I do. But what I try and spend my time on is about 6 months in advance. That's been a challenge for me as a young CEO or young business person, is setting a system to where I don't have to think about the day to day. So trusting my people to do, and I think this probably helps from having been a SEAL, trusting my people to take care of the day by day, the week by week, month by month tasks or things to get done, or planning, and to focus on kind of the 3 to 6 month time frame, and then set the conditions so that they can work towards that. That's a challenge for somebody like my work right now is like my passion, and it's my life, and I'm sort of betting my professional career on it. And so that's really hard to be hands off on the day to day, but I'm trying my best to focus on 3 to 6 months.
Can I ask a second question, Miss Megan?
Sure.
Oh, hey, George, cousin
Sorry.
George.
Sorry, I didn't mean to moderate.
No, good. I mean, we just leave Megan out of it. We just talk, you and I. Kidding. Your story, the thing that jumps out, you're not exactly the poster boy for easy. It's like you're a guy who's going to take on big challenges, right? I mean, just look at the resume, right? I mean, you don't have to say much
for better
more
or for worse, I guess.
Right? Well, you won't have to say. And I wrote a book a few years ago, a kind of an unusual book about Steve Jobs. And a neighbor of mine who's from India read the book, and then he came to me all excited about something he learned that I didn't even realize was in the book. He said, "You taught me that Steve Jobs was a person who took on big problems that were big enough for his spirit and big enough for his talents." And the guy says to me, "I wish more people did that." Now, you're like this paradigm of a guy who takes on big problems, right? I mean, going into the SEALs, that's taking on a big challenge. starting a company that's as difficult as what you're starting up with federal regulations and all that. You can't imagine a bigger challenge than that. My question is this. It's something we all need to do. Well, you know, there are two kinds of problems in life, the problems that pick us and the problems that we pick. And the ones that we pick, how can we be bold and pick big problems? Were you always like this, you know, as a kid, or did you gravitate toward this for any particular reason? Can you shed light on this for the rest of us who might be tempted to take tiny little problems along the way?
Well, absolutely, Tom. And I think that's probably the first and probably last someone ever compares me to Steve Jobs. So I'm gonna take it and relish in it while I can.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I don't know if I have always been interested in like big or hard problems. I think kind of for, like I said, for better or for worse, the enjoyment that I get out of trying to solve a big problem or in being a SEAL is kind of in like the journey to get there. Like part of me is like, man, when this thing works, I'll miss the fun part of the struggle. Like this is the fun part for me, is trying to solve these big problems. And so I guess if I had to think about advice, it's like I was reading a book about Jeff Bezos, and he says like he uses this like risk mitigation framework where he says like instead of trying to be happy or solve for your immediate needs, like try and minimize the risk of to yourself. And for him, the biggest risk was looking back later in life and thinking I didn't do anything big enough with my time. And so I think if you flip the paradigm and say like, look, I want to minimize my risk, and if it works, awesome. If not, I will die knowing I at least tried doing something really big and really hard. I think that's the way I think about it. And in terms of like potential advice, I think that risk mitigation thing is really useful in terms of the way to think about it.
And also what you said, George, about the part that's fun, right? You didn't say that the accomplishment, ultimately getting it done and saying, okay, it's done, mission accomplished. That's not the fun part. The fun part is the struggle to get there. And that ran through the theme of what our speaker last week, Tom Trevini, the comedy writer for the Late Late Show, he said the same thing. The joy is in the challenge, right? The joy is in the journey. And maybe when we realize that, we can pick the bigger problems because there's going to be a longer journey and there's a chance for more joy. There's a chance for more enjoyment. I just can't wait to see Navy SEALs and medical marijuana. What in the world are you warming up to? I mean, when you finish this one, what's next? I mean,
yeah, I don't like hang out with my two young kids for a little bit, I guess. I don't know.
There you go. Well, thanks for sharing all this with us. Really amazing.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I appreciate the really good question.
Mac Carroll has a follow-up. Mac.
So I'm really interested in sort of your business plan, I guess. And my first question is, how contaminated is California grown marijuana? You test for contaminants, right?
We do. So first question is, it depends and it's complicated. California's marijuana, and we don't participate in any way in the state legal, federally illegal market. But if you as a consumer were going to go buy medical marijuana from a dispensary in California, it has been tested to a more stringent standard than food products. However, the closed loop supply chain almost just doesn't exist. So there's a really good bet that the product you're going to buy, it's some way, shape, or form went in or out of the black market. So you should not place too much faith in those testing results that you're seeing. So it's pretty contaminated. I mean, even the FDA will tell you and the DEA would tell you, look, smoking marijuana has never killed anybody like immediately, but they are finding now in California that people using marijuana that is contaminated is killing them. It's particularly dangerous because immunocompromised patients are they're foregoing adherence to their traditional drugs. They're saying, hey, I have chronic pain or I have chemotherapy. I'm going to switch from my pharmaceutical and try this medical marijuana thing, which is potentially dangerous. And then they go and buy a product that was not produced under FDA standards and likely has pesticides and all sorts of other stuff. And then you smoke it, light it on fire, and it goes on your lungs. that can be really, really dangerous, and that is killing people. So it's definitely not a panacea. And like a lot of the folks that say, hey, it's perfect for every condition under the sun, I think that in probably 20 years, we'll look back a lot like people did with big tobacco, and that was really irresponsible to let them operate unchecked. Much more, much longer answer than you bargained for, but
that's very interesting. Thank you.
One of our graduating seniors, Ty, has a question for you, George.
Hey, George, appreciate your talk. Great talk. So I had two quick questions. The first was, as a Navy SEAL, I bet you're a pretty fit homie. Do you have any good home workouts? Because quarantine is definitely doing me dirty.
I hear you. And yes, I was fit. Now I'm just embarrassed by what's happened to me. But that being said, I think if I could do one workout a day, I would see how long it takes you to do 100 burpees. If you do that every day, and for people who don't know, it's just like a burpee is like you like standing up, then you drop to the floor, do a push up, and then jump as high as you can. If you do a burpee race to 100, which like if you have a bathroom, you have room to do it. A burpee race to 100, you'll be in incredible shape.
I'll text you how long that takes me. Second question was, I feel like one of the hardest parts of being an entrepreneur is juggling a whole bunch of very different things and having to do them simultaneously really well. So could you provide me, like, what would be your advice on how to balance that and kind of coordinate / do that the best you can?
Yeah, I think, and this was not an analogy I came up with, but it really resonates with me. And when you think about the juggling analogy, if you're an entrepreneur or a college student, you're juggling, 5 to 7 balls at any given time. Just don't drop the glass ones. Like, you're gonna drop some. You're gonna drop some of the plastic ones, the ones that bounce, that you know it's okay to deprioritize. But there are probably 1 or 2 things that really, really matter as an entrepreneur. Like for us, and you have to do those things right. It's what keeps you alive. And for me, that is, for us right now, it is making sure that a DEA Schedule I bulk manufacturer license is as perfect and tight and executable as possible. Like, that's the one thing I really care about. All the other stuff matters, but I can budget a little bit so long as I don't sacrifice that one thing that really matters. Don't drop the glass ball. The other thing that came to mind, I'm blanking on it. So it'll come back to me. The other thing I thought of as soon as you asked your question. So give me a second and it'll come back. But if I think of it during the rest of our time, if not, I'll shoot you an email or something. But there's something else that I thought of, but I'll come back to it.
So
thank you.
Great, thanks, Ty. Good questions. John Devine, class of '89. First of all, I had a comment early on, and I want to make sure you hear it because I don't know if you'll have time to look through all the comments. But he said early on, I love the link between both of George's career choices: the desire to serve his country as a SEAL, and his friend and those like his friend who needed help. So I thought that was a lovely thing that you should hear before we. It's too late for you to hear it. He also has a question. He'd love to. Yeah, John's super. He's a physician, so he's a good guy out there on the front lines right now too. He would love to hear your thoughts on fear and fearlessness, kind of to riff off of what Tom Morris was saying. You're not afraid to take on a big problem, and you'd have to be somewhat fearless to be a SEAL. So at the beginning of your talk, you alluded to moments of doubt along your journey. And John wanted to know what your advice would be for people who are having to manage fear.
Yeah, I'll start by saying, like, I absolutely had fears in SEAL training and then while deployed and overseas as well. And I think the thing that I always thought of is, like, you are not, or I am not my emotions. Like, who you are is your reaction to your emotions, but you are not your emotions. And so if you have fear or doubt or grief, like, that's completely fine and reasonable. And frankly, like it would be unreasonable not to have fear or doubt in an overwhelming situation in any profession. Where you separate yourself is the ability to control it and deal with it and manage it. So I think for me, like, I try and use my fear, and I'm not good at it by any means, but I'm working to get better, but use the fear to illuminate, like, why am I feeling this way? Like, if I'm fearful about something, there's probably something under the surface that my body or mind is telling me isn't right, and I need to try and pay attention to. Like, if I think of, so that's one thing. The other is, I think SEALs and people that have to do physical tasks where fear could play a part, I think the importance of, like, procedures and checklists matter. So, like, if I think of, you know, like a combat scuba dive as a SEAL, and you're underwater and freezing cold and it's pitch black dark, and you hear, like, a boat starting to go overhead, it would be one, like, that's scary, and I would feel fear. But the response to manage that is to go through a set of procedures and checklists that you've rehearsed 1,000 times when everything's normal. And so having an off-ramp to your fear that's been pre-thought out or pre-rehearsed, pre-imagined, I think helps you get through those moments. One thing that SEALs practice a lot, and it's taught early in life, and I've had to use this in certain business meetings where I've been just felt like the world is crumbling around me, is just really, really slow, controlled breathing. Like, take 4 seconds of a deep breath in, hold it for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds. And that, I think, reduces your heart rate, lets you center yourself and try and control your fear versus, or respond to the fear versus trying to ignore it or become overwhelmed by it.
Can I ask a question? I'm not quite sure. I graduated in '61, so I'm a little technologically challenged, and I was late getting onto it. But anyway, we've got a condo at Panama City Beach, and there's a Navy installation there, and I've heard it's one of the playgrounds of the SEALs. Is that true? And have you ever been there?
I have not been there. There is a diving. There are some diving operations in Florida that SEALs do. It's not like dive training, but it's where a lot of people will go before they deploy to practice certain diving. So, like, there's not SEAL trainees there, but there are oftentimes SEAL platoons getting ready to go overseas.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for George? Unbelievable. This is so awesome, George. What a great opportunity for all of us to spend some time together and take a few detours and hear all about a fascinating career of yours. And we're so excited you were here. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. I really, really appreciate it, everyone. And thanks so much. Hope everybody stays safe and sound and enjoys the extra time at home despite the frustrations. So thank you.